My name is Michelle Wu, and I'm chair of the Council's Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. I'm pleased to be here with several colleagues and esteemed representatives from the administration and community members for our hearing on docket number 1338, order for a hearing to discuss pedestrian crossing signals, traffic calming, and Vision Zero. The matter was sponsored by Councilor Ed Flynn and referred to committee on September 8th, 2019. I'd like to remind everyone that this is a public hearing being recorded and broadcast live on the City of Boston website, as well as various channels and on public access cable. As noted before, I'm joined by my colleague Ed Flynn, who's also the sponsor of this docket, as well as District Councilor Matt O'Malley. So what I'd like to propose in terms of the format of today is first, if my colleagues want to give any opening statement, and then I'd like to take 3 members of the public who had signed up to testify just to help us frame the issue as well, and then we'll hand it right over to our panel to dig in. We'll do question and answer with councilors, and then any remaining members of the public who wish to testify can do so at that time. If you didn't feel moved when you came in the door to testify, but you do at any point throughout the hearing, feel free to go and check the box on the sign-in sheets by the door, or at the very end, you can also just come up and get in line to testify. Welcome. Also, we're joined by my colleague, Councilor Frank Baker, as well. So for opening statements, Councilor Ed Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Wu, and thank you to the panelists for being here, and more importantly, for your tremendous work on this important issue. Pedestrian safety and Vision Zero, the goal of having 0 serious or fatal crashes, is one of our biggest issues we face as a city. It's certainly one of my top priorities as the city councilor. This hearing is about reviewing our traffic lights and crossing signals for our pedestrians. Across my district and the city, residents have expressed concerns about vehicles having the green light, and at the same time that the pedestrians also have a signal to cross. I also want to continue the conversation I've had in the past as a city council on infrastructure improvements to our roads to slow down vehicles, whether it's through speed humps, raised crosswalks, rapid flash beacons, or pedestrian signals, curb extensions. In my opinion, it's about a combination of these infrastructure improvements to our built environment, slower speeds, and enforcement from the Boston Police. Last year, we had a tragic crash that took the life of a beautiful young boy in my neighborhood. It devastated our community, and neighbors demanded changes to make sure our streets are safer. Katie Donovan, who's also a neighbor and a friend of mine, was also struck at East Broadway and Farragut Road last summer. The city made changes with a stop sign in the middle of the road and a pedestrian island to make it safer. At that time, I recommended a 12-point plan to the city and to our community that included infrastructure improvements and physical changes to our roads, like speed humps, raised crosswalks, rapid flash beacons, or blinking pedestrian signal signs, and curb extensions. We talked about road diets to make one lane for narrower roads and slower speeds, as well as designated areas for delivery trucks on West Broadway. I called for this hearing to also follow up on a discussion that Councilor Frank Baker and I had last year on lowering the speed limit to 20 miles per hour, along with the traffic calming measures and especially in enforcement. I know in various locations across the city, the speed limit was reduced to 20 miles an hour in and around schools or elderly developments. We recently had a tragic crash on Summer and Melcher Street in September. And Boston Police informed me that the investigation is ongoing. Again, residents throughout my district have called attention to pedestrian signal timing. In my opinion, we need to do everything we can and prioritize the safety for pedestrians, our seniors, children, persons with disabilities. Since filing this hearing order, I've heard from residents from different parts of the city who are concerned about pedestrian safety and talked about areas where there are issues with crossing signals. This is an important issue for many residents in our city, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Thank you again for sponsoring this. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief because it's important to hear from the panel and more importantly to hear from members of the public. Thank you to the lead sponsor, my good colleague and friend from District 2 for his leadership, as well as sort of the approach that this body has taken on this issue through the year. I remember probably 5 or 6 years ago now, I called a hearing order on new rules of the road, looking at new technologies such as what's known as virtual speed humps, traffic cameras, other things to help with traffic calming measures. Worked with the council president last year on the first Vision Zero hearing after it was announced. Grateful to Chief Osgood and his team for always looking to work. Obviously, this is an issue that affects every neighborhood. It is one of the largest topics of conversation in West Roxbury. I know I've got some great neighbors and friends from West Roxbury who I hope we'll hear from shortly. I think it's important as we figure out what the best approach is that we listen to one another. We realize there is no magic, panacea, so to speak, but there's things that we can be doing to make our streets and our roads safer, particularly for pedestrians. We're seeing, obviously, the city grow by leaps and bounds. With that comes more cars, more vehicles. We want to make sure that we can both address that while at the same time building a safe and thriving community throughout every neighborhood in the city of Boston. So I think this is a great opportunity to hear from one another, to listen to some real statistics, and to continue working together to find out a plan that makes sense and that is both sort of respectful of the neighborhoods while at the same time increases awareness and safety. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Malley. Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to thank the lead sponsor, thank the chair for having this committee hearing. Thank you guys for coming out. Just looking to see if we're ready to start giving us some speed bumps and some things that we advocate for in all of our neighborhoods. I think everybody knows what we want. How do we get there? So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. And now, Councilor Kim Janey.
Thank you so much. I just want to go on record having thanked our lead sponsor for this. It's a really important conversation. I share Councilor Flynn's concerns for pedestrian safety. I'm interested in hearing what more we can do as a body to ensure the safety of all who use our roads. I want to thank the panel for being here, and I look forward to having a productive conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. So again, we'll take the first 3 members of the public who had signed up to testify and then proceed to our panel after that. That will be Scott Burke, Gilbert Ho, and Brendan Kearney. And if you could just identify yourself and your address for the record and keep your testimony to 2 minutes, that'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Scott Burke, and I'm the managing partner of Morrison Mahoney, a law firm at 250 Summer Street in Boston. Our building is right outside the crosswalk where the fatality was involved this past September 11th. And my major issue, right, accidents happen, but last February I emailed the city, as did a number of other either executive directors or owners of businesses in the neighborhood, to warn of that change of light sequence. I got no response, but there were 8 people from the transportation department that were included in that email. And I have copies of the email and other communications, 15 of them that I'm happy to submit. In June, nothing having happened, there were additional reports to 311, as well as a letter to Mayor Walsh. There was an email response to that the information was provided to the Transportation Department. The death of Diane was absolutely preventable if anybody listened to us. And I hope that there's some way that when there's a change of light sequence like that, the city would come to a business owner. I've been in that building since 1990. I've crossed that crosswalk, that spot, almost every business day for almost 30 years. Get some input. I understand that there are experts that look at traffic. They're there for a period of time. They do their study. But we have local knowledge that I think is important. So hopefully there's a way that we can communicate better that way. And the only other recommendation I have is we had a crosswalk issue on Congress Street that was missing for a year and a half because the developer who built 10 Farnsworth Street that was required to put in curb cuts and put in a crosswalk that had been there before construction, the developer did not do that. The building was occupied in March of 2018. Again, another issue where I sent 10 emails to the city, and it wasn't until after Diane was killed on Summer Street, and thank you, Councilor Flynn, your getting involved resulted in that crosswalk being installed finally last week. But that was 18 months of another death waiting to happen. And they make sure that if a developer is required to do something for street safety as part of the development, don't let them put people in the building until they've done that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. Gilbert?
Good afternoon. My name is Gilbert Ho, a longtime Chinatown community activist. And thank you, Councilor Flynn, to bring on this topic for pedestrian safety. And Chinatown is obviously very concerned about the safety for the pedestrian because we got senior citizens, family with young children with carriage and handicapped with cane and crossing the street. So we mentioned that to Councilor Flynn that the traffic light should be on the green should be delayed for pedestrian crossing because right now when the crosswalk light is on and it's also green light from the other side, so people and car is fighting for the traffic and trying to getting across. I know the city is extended the limit of crossing the timing for crossing, but which need to further look into, see if we can slow down the right turn or left turn for the allow pedestrian crossing with ease. That way we don't have to fighting with traffic. Another issue is I know right turn on red and everybody know how to do that, but I see a lot of the car is not really yielding for the pedestrian when they're making the right turn. They're thinking their right turn on red is their right away, and especially on service road turning into Leland, when people just try to cross and the traffic just making a turn is just very, very dangerous for the pedestrian. We have traffic accident and a couple years ago, and the lady got dragged all the way to Dorchester for that. It's still in the recovery. So hopefully the Boston Transportation Department will look into that, and hopefully we can get that resolved. Another location is also on Leland Street, is where the Hudson Street is. Right now, there's no crosswalk. Many years ago, before One Greenway and 66 Hudson and 88 Hudson was built, there was no pedestrian traffic. So there's no need to look into crosswalk over there. But now they got 3 resident building was built and have all fully occupied. We got a lot of family try to cross the street from the other side of the Chinatown into the Chinatown using the Hudson Street. Sometimes they just bravely just fighting the traffic going across. So I did a little study from a similar location, like Arlington Street to Mass Ave on Tremont Street. There are 14 set of crosswalk without traffic light for the pedestrian easy to cross the street. So Chinatown just need one on Leland Street. That way will be helpful for the pedestrian crossing. I know they're so close to the traffic light to make another traffic light is not very feasible, but a crosswalk definitely would help. So hopefully that Chris and BTD can look into that. That's it. That's all. Thank you for Councilor for listening to the community and the panel addressing the issue. And thank you, Councilor Flynn. Thanks to Councilor Wu to take a lead on this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilbert.
Thank you, Gilbert.
Brendan?
Hi, my name is Brennan Carney. I'm the Deputy Director of Walk Boston. We're a statewide pedestrian advocacy organization. Thank you for holding this hearing. It's especially timely with yesterday's International World Day of Remembrance, and thank you, Councilor Flynn, for being there. World Day of Remembrance, we take a minute to recognize the people that we've lost over the last year to traffic violence. And it is violence. It is a violent act that happens on our streets. And the good thing is we can prevent this. We can do it through design. We can do it through fixing signal timing. But it's also about that design is to influence behavior, and especially driver behavior, because out of the 70 pedestrians that we've lost this year in Massachusetts, drivers were involved, cars were involved. This is not pedestrian on pedestrian crashes. When we say pedestrian crashes, we say they were struck by cars. I just want to highlight the Go Boston 2030 report. Page 140 is all about pedestrian first traffic signals. There are great recommendations in this report. We should be putting them into practice. The city has already done the research on this. They've brought in a bunch of other research from all around the US and around the world about what makes it safer for pedestrians. We know what makes it safer. It's fixing the light timing. So it's reliable and people know what they're going to get when they come up to an intersection. I was just walking around last week with the 4 Point Neighborhood Association and a number of people in the Seaport, and a number of the new traffic signals that are installed in the Seaport, they're concurrent. But you have to push a button to get that concurrent signal. Otherwise, it will skip you for an entire cycle, which, if I was walking on those streets, I would then go when it's safe, because it just doesn't make sense that the people driving get the traffic lights each time during the cycle and I don't. That's not respecting people walking. We need to do better as America's walking city. The NACTO conference is in Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville next September. We should make it a goal to make sure that the things that we said we were going to do in Go Boston 2030 are actually in practice by next September. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, I want to recognize that our Council President, Andrea Campbell, has joined us as well. President Campbell, do you want to make any opening statement? Everyone else? Okay, great. So then we'll hand it over to the panel.
Thanks so much, Councilor. Thanks so much to all six of you. You are each fantastic leaders, advocates, and partners around road safety and around our efforts to get to Vision Zero. I'm Chris Osgood. I have the honor of serving as Mayor Walsh's Chief of Streets. I'm joined here by Greg Rooney, our Acting Transportation Commissioner, as well as Deputy Superintendent Kevin McGoldrick from the Boston Police Department. As Brennan just said, yesterday was the World Day of Remembrance, a day when we remember all those who lost their lives or are seriously injured on streets across the globe. It's also a day when we recommit as a community to the urgent effort to make our streets safer for all. In Boston, as Brendan noted, Mayor Walsh is committed to a Vision Zero, the Vision Zero campaign, an international effort to reach zero deaths and zero serious injuries on our streets. I wanted to briefly highlight the 5 areas of work that our team is doing to give people sort of a broad framework for the efforts of the city and the efforts that both the council and the administration have been doing together. It includes citywide work focused on legislation, around maintenance and around education, a set of work around our major roads and corridors, a set of work on our residential areas, our neighborhood slow streets program, and then some specific work, both spot interventions and building out a strategic bike network across our city. We'll start first with the citywide efforts. Again, there's work around legislation, there's work around education, there's work around maintenance. Because of the good advocacy of really almost every single person in this room, we are likely to succeed this week after years of advocacy in pushing forward a distracted driving bill to be signed at the State House, which is, again, a credit to a lot of voices who have been advocating for this. In this room, we also put forward and passed a model ordinance for sidecar protection, and together have been pushing to do the same at the Commonwealth. Together, as has been referenced, we were able to lower the default speed limit in the city of Boston and give other municipalities that same ability to lower the speed limit. And recently, the three of us, Commissioner Rooney, Deputy Superintendent McGoldrick, and I were up at the State House pushing for photo enforcement for stop arms on school buses, an authority that 22 states have, but not yet the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. These legislative efforts are a credit to the broad group of advocates that exist in the Commonwealth, and many of them are represented in this room. To Brennan's point, we also have a huge focus on education. We are focused on ensuring that everybody who is using our streets, everybody who's behind the wheel is practicing safe driving behaviors. We have run 2 rounds now of what's called the Boston Safest Driver Program. This is an educational competition that encourages people not to speed, encourages them not to accelerate quickly, brake harshly, corner too quickly, and most importantly, not use their smartphone while they're driving. This is something which we partnered with Liberty Mutual and a group called Cambridge Mobile Telematics on, and the impact has been effective. Those participants have actually become safer drivers because of their involvement in the program. This fall, we also partnered with the MAPFRE Foundation, with MIT, and with Children's Hospital to run a series of interactive educational programs on Boston City Hall Plaza, all focused on safe driving habits, and the MAPFRE Foundation is interested in carrying that forward in the years ahead. In addition to the work around education, there's some core baseline maintenance that we've been able to do thanks to the support of the City Council. We've doubled our investment in things like pavement markings across the city. In FY18 and FY19 combined, we restriped about 2,600 crosswalks in the city of Boston. This year, during this fiscal year alone, we've restriped another 1,000, with more to do, obviously, in the balance of the fiscal year. While the work that's citywide, the work around education, around maintenance, around legislative activities is really important, most of the work that Greg and I and our team focuses on are the engineering changes on our streets, the engineering changes that help lead to safer driving and safer streets in general. That work is really focused on major corridors, on residential side streets, on spot interventions, and on the strategic bike network. For the major corridors, the Boston Transportation Department looked at where all the crashes are occurring across the city of Boston, looked at those corridors that had the most crashes involving people who are walking, who are biking, who are driving. That has informed what we call the High Crash Network. This is a document which you can see on the Boston Transportation Department's website. It's roughly 60 miles of roadway in the city of Boston. We've been using that High Crash Network as a way in which we're prioritizing our capital program, making sure that as we build, we are looking to invest in those corridors, and that when we rebuild any corridor, that we're really prioritizing safety. Some of that work you can already see on city streets. We're wrapping up the reconstruction of Commonwealth Ave between the BU Bridge and Packard's Corner. We have rebuilt the sidewalks and the road of Center Street between Hyde Square and Jackson Square, adding raised crosswalks throughout that stretch. Quincy Street between Blue Hill Ave and Columbia Road now has wider sidewalks, has narrower lanes. Some of the projects have broken ground or will shortly. Dudley Square is under reconstruction now, both all the way around the station itself, as well as, thanks to Councilor Janey's advocacy, connecting all the way up to Melnia Cass. Next year, Melnia Cass will be breaking ground on that $25 million reconstruction of that corridor. And then we've had a series of community conversations about the redesign and improvement of Tremont Street in the south end to make it better for walking and for biking. There's also some longer term projects which, thanks to the council's support, we are moving forward on. Columbia Road has an $11 million investment, and we've just hired the person to lead the community planning process to redesign and reconstruct Columbia Road, heading from Franklin Park north. We also, in collaboration with Councilor Campbell, have been working on a process to look at how we improve Blue Hill Avenue, making sure that it works better for every single person on that road, regardless of how they move, with a particular emphasis on safety as well as on transit. And then we've already started the community process for rebuilding and redesigning Cummins Highway, headed towards Rosendale out of Mattapan Square, again with an emphasis on safety. In total, we have dozens of projects on the move in these key corridors, which total hundreds of millions of dollars, really making sure that all of our corridors, and in particular the High Crash Network, are places we're targeting our largest capital funds. In addition to that, obviously we have a program which is very much focused on contiguous blocks within residential areas. This is the Neighborhood Slow Streets program. These are areas that we've prioritized that have sort of 3 major elements to them. One is high numbers of vulnerable road users. The second are high numbers of crashes. And the third are key links in the transportation network. So when we are looking at which neighborhood slow street areas we prioritize, we are looking at the percentage of households who are seniors, who have youth, who have persons with disabilities, the numbers of schools, community centers, libraries, and parks, that are in those areas. We're looking at the number of crashes that are on the residential streets, the number of crashes that are on the intersections that are surrounding these areas, and the number of links to things like key bus routes, MBTA stations, et cetera, making sure that we are prioritizing those places where we have, again, the most crashes and the most vulnerable road users. We know that there is much more to do in these areas. Two of the locations, Stony Brook and the Talbot Norfolk Triangle, phase 1 is already complete, 5 more shortly going under construction. Another 5 are in design, and we'll be selecting some additional ones over the course of the months ahead. In total, those 12 locations alone cover about 40 road miles within the city of Boston. Again, as I know that we will hear from you, and you are right to say, that is just the start. There's more that needs to be done than those 40 road miles for the Neighborhood Slow Streets program. But those are the places, as has been discussed, where we're redesigning our streets for 20 miles per hour. We're adding speed humps. We are tightening up intersections. We are using pavement markings and road signs in new and different ways. In addition to the Neighborhood Slow Streets program, a huge priority for us is also the Strategic Bike Network. We have a stated goal of having roughly 4 times as many people commuting to work by bike in 2030 than do today. We will not get there unless we have a connected network of high-quality bike infrastructure that allows more people who would want to bike to feel comfortable doing so. A couple of years ago, we had only 2 miles of protected bike infrastructure in the city of Boston. Today, we've got about 8. We have 9 more, which are under design. The next sets that are moving forward, as some of you are well aware and have been advocating, will be the Mass Ave section, the section of Mass Ave that goes from Melnia Cass towards Columbia Road, as well as essentially some northern extensions off of the Southwest Corridor that connect people who use the Southwest Corridor into downtown, are the 2 sort of areas that are currently in the planning conversations. In addition to that work, there's a lot of work which we're doing that's simply just around spot interventions, things which we're doing to find ways to calm speeds on residential streets, to improve sight lines, to make intersections work better and work safer for everybody. One of the things which no doubt folks have seen, we've installed roughly 85 speed feedback signs across the city of Boston. We're going to do another 20 over the course of this fiscal year, and another 40 are slotted for next fiscal year, using a tool on our city streets which we know can actually reduce speeding on our roads. We also have a lot of focus on improving crossings, doing things like daylighting intersections using rectangular rapid flash beacons, PED delineators, using tactical median islands, as Councilor Flynn mentioned, at Farragut Road. These are things which we've done in Rosendale Square and Mattapan Square, on River Street, at the Orient Heights T-Stop, just to name a few of the locations. This is work which is driven by things like 311, by things like requests from the City Council, and is work which is happening across the entire city. None of this work would be possible, the work around education, the work around redesigning our corridors, pushing the Neighborhood Slow Streets program farther and faster, building out our strategic bike network, doing more of these spot interventions, if it weren't for the resources which together we've been able to bring to bear. Together we have been able to raise parking fines. You've been supportive of raising parking meters. Tomorrow we're going to be in this room talking about TNC assessments. The revenue from that has allowed us to double the number of planners within the Boston Transportation Department. We've added 6 more engineers to be able to review and design infrastructure changes on our streets. We've added 4 more construction managers to make sure that those approved plans are actually getting built. We've added a team within our Public Works Department to focus more on the actual maintenance of these locations after they are built. And the bulk of the investment is actually going to the capital infrastructure itself, the literal concrete and asphalt necessary to actually change our roads. With all these resources, we are going faster, but clearly the goal that we seek is to get to 0 fatalities, and we are not there yet. So there's much, much more work which is in front of us, and a need for us to go even faster still. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Again, I appreciate your advocacy and collaboration on so much of this work. And I'll turn it over to the Deputy Superintendent if he has any opening remarks, and then over to questions to you.
You know, this is primarily about design and construction, so, you know, that the Boston Police will continue our enforcement activities, but we understand that education and design is as crucial, if not more crucial, than the enforcement side. But relative to what we do, in addition to be able to change our priorities based on whatever road conditions change as a result of these projects, we're also, as a result, I think, directly of a previous city council hearing 6 or 8 months ago, we're hiring a traffic analyst at police headquarters, which will give us a way to more precisely target our enforcement activities, because that will always be a part of traffic safety. I mean, whatever designs we make, there are still people that will be distracted, or some people that will intentionally not obey the laws. So enforcement will be a part of it, and we'll target those enforcement efforts more precisely once we have the data that's analyzed, like we analyze pretty much everything else to target our resources. So I think that will be a big step forward. That's in the final hiring aspect of getting that person on board. And then we'll continue to do what we usually do. We have, we maintain the dedicated traffic enforcement by district. The captains go out to community meetings and target our resources based on community feedback. We've developed a more robust pedestrian and bicycle response protocol, where a supervisor's dispatched to every call that involves a pedestrian or a bicycle traffic accident. We've expanded our accident investigator training and capability so that we can have a better idea of exactly why those accidents are occurring and who's at fault. It's just an overall more robust approach, not just at the fatal accidents, which we have always had pretty good resources for, but we've expanded it beyond that, knowing that there's a tremendous value in stopping these things before they get to the level of serious accidents. But if you have any questions, I'll...
Thank you. And anything? We're good? Okay. I want to recognize that Councillor Anissa Sabi-George has joined us as well, and turn it over to Councillor Flynn for questions. Oh, sorry, and Councillor Josh Zakum too. Didn't look to that side.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. And I know Councilor O'Malley and Deputy Superintendent, you both talked about public awareness, public education campaign. I know you did as well, Chris. What can we do as a city to better inform the public about rules of the road, pedestrian safety issues? How do we educate them? How do we reach them? And what can we do to make sure that our residents are getting the most updated information from the city?
So I'll start, and certainly these gentlemen will have probably more expertise than I will. One thing which I know that actually many of you do, all of you do, is that you make it something which you talk about regularly. I think that makes a huge difference, and I give each of you a lot of credit for that. In addition, the work within the Boston Transportation Department, we do have a sort of increasing focus on thinking about what is the education and outreach. So programs like Boston Safest Driver, that collaboration with Liberty Mutual, and programs with the MAPFRE Foundation are ways in which we want to increase the amount of educational outreach we're doing for every single person which is on the road. We've also been putting in some sort of additional signage with new projects that we think is also going to help people sort of use the road more safely. We do appreciate sort of any ideas and collaboration with the entire City Council on education.
I think to piggyback off what the Chief mentioned regarding the MAPFRE Foundation event that we held a few months back, we're looking to scale that into more of a year-round initiative, and we're in the beginning conversations. It's important, the work that we're doing, as the Chief mentioned, trying to make sure that some of the signage that we install, along with some of the other implementations, it also gives more awareness. The speed feedback boards provide a very visible response for people to be aware of the speeds at which they're traveling. The signage that speaks to the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit in thickly populated areas to also give a reminder to people to slow down. We'd like to, there's three components in this. It's engineering, it's education, and it's enforcement, and without all three, it's difficult to really achieve the goals that we're trying to attain. So we'll continue to work on the MAPFRE program. We'll continue to reach out and speak with community groups. Certainly this is something that is a high priority, educating all road users, pedestrians, drivers, and cyclists. Everybody. One of the great points behind the MAPFRE event was it was to have all users have empathy for each other and to understand the actions that one commits, does have a direct impact on everybody. So we want to get that message out, and we'll continue to do that.
I think when we do some federally funded traffic enforcement, there's always a tie-in. The one that comes to mind particularly is that the click it or ticket. If we're going to send people out there specifically targeting people not wearing seatbelts, then you'll hear an accompanying public education campaign, and they do that with a lot of different things. Whether it's an OUI enforcement or anything like that. So I think there's always an opportunity when we're conducting enforcement to lead that with education, even if it's just PSAs in the media.
Thank you. Chief, on the issue of concurrent or joint jurisdiction for the pedestrian walking across the street, and at the same time the vehicle going at the same location, for example, on High Street, if you're walking across the street on High Street, High and Congress, you have the right of way, but if you're on High Street and taking a right on Congress, the signal also gives the vehicle the right of way. So the vehicle and the pedestrian are almost in competition with each other, and both have the right of way according to the signal. What are we doing about that situation? I know it's the case across the city, but can we look at that to make a change where one person would go first, the vehicle may go first, then the pedestrian would go after, the pedestrian would go first, but I don't think both of them can go at the same route at the same time.
So we have roughly 850 traffic signals in the city of Boston. I think around 2/3 of them are concurrent as opposed to exclusive. So, there's actually a higher percentage of exclusive signals in the city of Boston than in many other places. One thing which we've been doing, I think Gil touched on in his remarks, is that at locations that have concurrent signals, to provide what's called a leading pedestrian interval. This gives essentially a couple of seconds at the beginning of the cycle for pedestrians to be able to advance, and they always have the right of way. We are looking, though, at sort of our signal policy in general. Similar to what Brendan said, we are looking at the signals that we have across the board, how we prioritize the retiming of them, and the criteria we're using for making that judgment between whether something should be concurrent or exclusive. And that is work which we're ramping up right now to be able to get underway very, very shortly.
That's an issue that concerns me greatly, is allowing both the pedestrian and the vehicle to go at the same time at the same location. And I'm troubled about that because I've seen many accidents that almost have taken place, and I've seen accidents that have taken place. So I think we have to decide which one is going to go first and which one is going to go second, but both of them can't go at the same time. It's a huge public safety concern for me. So I hope I can continue working with you on that, Absolutely. Chief. And again, I want to say thank you, Chief. I was with you yesterday at the Day of Remembrance Ceremony Vigil up at the State House, so I want to say thank you to you and your team for doing a lot of good work across our city. And I know it's a difficult subject. There's a lot of infrastructure changes that can be taking place, but I want to say thank you to you and your team for working hard and working closely with the City Council. Madam Chair, that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor O'Malley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for that presentation. I have a number of sort of general policy questions as it relates to, raised crosswalks, speed humps, et cetera, traffic cameras, but wanted to begin focused on a very important issue and widely discussed issue in West Roxbury, and that relates to the proposed road diet. As many of you know, and the folks who are in the audience may know, there was a fatal crash. A pedestrian was struck and killed back in February. We called a meeting in March. It was overwhelmingly crowded, filled to the rafters at the Elks. Thank you for your partnership in that, Chief. The BTD and your cabinet came up with a series of recommendations, not a plan, just an early recommendations where we had the hearing in June. It's been a controversial plan, to say the least. I said then, and I will reiterate now, I think there's a lot of good in the plan, other things that we could possibly tweak. I think most people would agree with that. There's obviously a lot of concerns from business owners that this could adversely impact businesses. There's concerns from neighbors who live on perpendicular streets that this would just force the problem elsewhere. So I guess my question, Chief and Commission, you live in the neighborhood as I do, where are we sort of in the process? And I guess I want to make sure, and I know the answer is yes, which is why I'm asking this, that folks have an opportunity to continue to weigh in, and this is an ongoing conversation. So can either of you just sort of talk about where we are specifically in West Roxbury, and then I'll get to more general questions.
Well, thank you. We have been actively engaged with the community since that June meeting. Countless hours have been spent, drop-in hours at some of the local businesses to listen to people, get feedback. We've had meetings with, I've personally attended several meetings with a lot of the business owners. There's a meeting tomorrow night that a newly formed group called the West Roxbury Safety Association did their own audit of all the crosswalks along that stretch of Center Street and essentially are proposing some recommendations that they think would be helpful to ensure pedestrian safety. We've been doing work throughout the summer as well. More signage, 2 speed feedback signs were installed, one in front of St. Teresa's Church, one further down Center Street, basically at the Speedway gas station, that location. Other signage referring to the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit in the heavily populated area. We've been replacing, we did a tactical crosswalk at Hastings Street earlier in the summer, which included better visibility, some daylighting, new pavement markings. The last few weeks, and the weather has not really cooperated for us, we've been addressing the remaining 14 crosswalks that had brick pavers. We're removing those pavers and putting in new asphalt and new pavement markings to make them more visible. So we're continuing.
Will they be raised at all?
They won't be raised,
okay,
but they will be. They'll provide better visibility. So that work's ongoing. The meeting tomorrow night again is an opportunity for this group to share some of their ideas, and we've been listening to them as well as others, and we'll continue to do that. The thought was we would have a follow-up public meeting. We were hoping to do it in November, but because there's been so much conversation, we thought it was better to ensure that we spent the time to listen and then go back to the drawing board and come back with some other alternatives. So that conversation is very ongoing and will continue to be for the next several weeks, and we'll reconvene and we'll schedule another public meeting at some point probably after the first of the year.
Okay. So no November sort of meeting. I take your point. There's been a lot of conversation. Likely not December. You think after in January would be sort of the time the city comes back? And
I think it would be prudent to get through the holidays, and again, there's been a lot of constructive dialogue, so I think it's good to proceed at a cautious pace rather than rush. We wouldn't be able to do anything physically until the spring at this point because of the weather, so it makes sense for us to take a little more time, make sure that we continue to be able to listen and provide this feedback, and again, we'll come back with some other alternatives, and we'll engage the community again before any final plans are made.
Okay. No, I appreciate that, Commission, and I know as someone who also lives in West Roxbury, you've been intimately involved in this. Kudos to Charlotte Fleetwood from your team who's been doing yeoman's work, and kudos to advocates on every side of this issue. I think it's important to note that we all want the same thing, which is a safer Center Street. People may respectfully disagree on how we get there or what that ultimately looks like, but at the end of the day, I think it's important not to lose sight of the fact that that's what we want, and the conversation will continue, and look forward to working with you all and working with all neighbors. All right, now sort of general questions, and feel free to cut me off, Madam Chair, because I've got 8 of them. Raised crosswalks. Can you talk a little bit about raised crosswalks? Seem to, as a theory, make perfect sense, provides better visibility for a pedestrian crossing a street, acts as a speed bump essentially to slow people down. Does the city support raised crosswalks? Are there concerns around public safety? Sort of a general policy matter?
Our engineers have certainly supported raised crosswalks. There are places where they do make sense, there are places where they may not. Thinking of your district, walk down Center Street today from Jackson Square to Hyde Square, you have many of the crossings along Center Street sort of headed north are now raised crosswalks, and that is for exactly the reason you said. It makes it a better crossing for pedestrians and slows down vehicles as they turn into the neighborhood.
So it used to be sort of the conventional wisdom was they were bad for plows and fire engines. What I'm hearing now is they're not a panacea, but certain areas they would work, others they wouldn't work.
Certainly part of our toolkit, absolutely.
Great. What about speed cameras or traffic cameras? I know we don't have those anywhere in Massachusetts,
The Commonwealth of
right?
Massachusetts does not currently allow photo enforcement.
And that's a state law?
Correct.
And is there any movement afoot to change that state law?
There's a number of different bills at the State House, one of which is one that I mentioned, which the three of us were recently up there for, which is specific to stop arm cameras.
Okay.
But we can send you the range of bills that are focused on various elements of photo enforcement.
Okay. And then similarly, the hands-free driving, the distracted driving bill, that's currently being debated, I believe, at the state, or should be this week?
We actually think this week that it may even be signed.
Signed into law by the governor. Okay, great. And then tomorrow, the lead sponsor, Councilor Flynn, and I are holding a hearing on TNCs and sort of a way to generate revenue, which is something that there's a local option capability, which I think is crucial. One of the most interesting things as someone who drives around the city every day is after the state guidelines changed it that a rideshare would have to post a sticker, typically for Uber or Lyft. It seems as though, particularly when you get in town, 1 out of every 6 or 7 cars is a rideshare. Obviously, we have they don't all originate in Boston, but I would say it's a pretty safe bet to say most end in Boston. And that can sort of add to some traffic, some congestion is also some sort of pedestrian danger that could come of that. Is there, I know in certain parts of the city you've had designated TNC pickup and drop-off areas. Has that been successful? Is that something that you'd be looking to perhaps expand?
Yep, we can go over this in more detail tomorrow, but we just published sort of our report on the pilot zone that we did on Boylston Street in the Fenway, and we've expanded it to a couple more locations in the South Boston waterfront. It's certainly something which we're looking to expand. We are, like everything, we are learning as we roll it out what the right way is to get TNCs or any sort of short-term pickup and drop-off to the curb, which is where we want them for safety. It's where we want them for a number of reasons.
Great. And what about apps such as Waze that sort of reroute people often? It's seemingly beneficial to someone that you can shave off some time from your drive, but it also then sort of reroutes traffic into side streets. Have there been any municipalities, to anyone's knowledge, that have sort of blocked out Waze, or these? Is that even possible?
Not to my knowledge. Waze does take feedback about road closures, but I don't know if they are currently accepting sort of removing blocks from lists at this point.
Okay, great. And then back to more specifically sort of pedestrian safety. Superintendent McGoldrick, after the fatal crash in February, we had an officer stationed at the Center and Hastings Street intersection, not quite round the clock, but for large chunks of the day for weeks, if not a couple months. Obviously, it works. Obviously, we don't have the manpower to keep that at every dangerous intersection throughout the city. But has there been any talk? I mean, this is somewhat related. I think that we need to really, as a city, bolster the ranks of all public safety officials, particularly the first responders, particularly Boston Police. As the city's grown, we haven't seen that sort of same change in the growth of our number of officers. But second of all, has there been any movement to take advantage of the cadets and maybe some folks that are in the academy to sort of help with pedestrian safety?
Not specifically the academy or the cadets. We do have an academy class that will start next month is the current schedule, so that we're hopeful that will stay on schedule. Their training, they have about 6 months of training. That's pretty packed. They wouldn't be that we wouldn't be able to free up any time for them to be effective. The cadets are a little different. They have more administrative assignments. It would be a challenge to find a really effective way for them to be out there in an enforcement capacity that wouldn't come with risks that would probably be unacceptable. There is some history of them doing some traffic control as far as directing traffic at intersections, and I could see the visibility benefits of it, but there are downsides as well. I think if you have an officer out there that's fully capable of doing the traffic enforcement and can engage people and issue citations, the deterrent effect that shows to everyone else that sees that happening is probably more valuable than having someone that will be, pretty quickly disregarded as someone without the authority to do that. I mean, unfortunately, you see a lot of people travel the same routes all the time, and if they see pretty quickly that a person is out there without any real authority to stop someone or capability to stop someone, it's pretty quickly seen as not that effective, and people tend to ignore it.
Yeah, okay. And Chief, you mentioned the speed feedback signs. We also have some sort of mobile ones that we can deploy to certain areas. Is there going to be a movement as you guys put your budget together to increase those? Because I think those are a great way to sort of, absent an actual officer or someone with the capability of writing a ticket or a warning, it seems like those are great ways to sort of help slow our speeding as well.
So it's actually in both of our budgets.
Right.
And we are expanding our capacity for next year. So I believe we're looking at budgeting for 40 speed feedback signs in FY21. We have about 20 more that we're going to add to the roughly 87 that we've got deployed right now in this fiscal year.
Great.
So we are ramping up our efforts there too.
Great. And I've been a big proponent of the Neighborhood Slow Street program. Encouraged, I don't know how many applications we had in District 6, but dozens upon dozens upon dozens. We've actually, the first one was piloted right off of Washington Street. It works well. Are we looking to increase that budget as well as we get into the next budget season?
So we've significantly increased the staffing there.
Yeah.
And I think what we want to do is understand what's the right mix of capital and staff to be able to go at the speed, which I know that every single person in this room wants us to be able to go there.
Yeah.
And that is something which we'll be taking a look at over the course of the budget building for this upcoming fiscal year.
And I also wonder if there's a way we can have a conversation, this will be my last question for this round, to expand that. I mean, there has been virtually no negative feedback from it. Obviously, there's a good process in place to get buy-in from neighbors, by direct abutters. The only negative feedback has been, I didn't get it, my neighborhood didn't get it, didn't literally win the lottery in this case. So I wonder, as we talk about sort of planning in the future, there's a more ecumenical way of doing more, recognizing it's going to cost a lot more money, but maybe that's a conversation, again, as we talk about raising the meters, as we talk about raising tickets, as we talk about TNC revenue, that could be a way to help pay for it.
Certainly, I think we should glad to have that conversation as we build the budget for FY21. One friendly amendment, I think, to what you said. It is a prioritization. It's not
Certainly.
sort of by random. So it is. The full methodology is online as well as the reports are online. We are looking at where do you have seniors, where do you have youth, where do you have persons with disabilities, where do you have a lot of crashes. Those are the places we're investing first. I know that every single one of you wants us to be doing more and going faster. We are just trying to prioritize those places where we have the highest number of road users and the most frequent number of crashes.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Malley. Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming out today. Chris, you talked about Columbia Road from Franklin Park north. How far? So what is the scope of the work and how far north are you talking about?
It would go all the way to Edward Everett, the extent of the city's, the extent that it is the city. I think it's DCRs from Edward Everett, essentially, to Kosciuszko Circle.
And so we'll go all the way to Kosciuszko Circle?
No, so from Edward Everett to Kosciuszko Circle, it's DCRs.
Would be something.
So our section is essentially from Franklin Park to Edward Everett Square.
And bike lanes and what are we talking about there?
Literally just hired the community planner for this. So our first step, similar to what we have been doing with Blue Hill Ave, is to engage the community to understand what are the things that residents want along the Columbia Road corridor, knowing that is on our high crash network. It is a place which we want to really improve the safety of. We want to work with the residents to understand what's the range of interest. We have some opportunities on that, certainly on that stretch, to design it in a different way than it functions today.
Okay, so the next step, the next The other part that we were talking about was to Kazusko Circle. What is our involvement with the state there? Are we in discussions with the state
That's
about
correct.
improvements there?
So, yes, there's an interest in a broader set of sort of Kosciuszko Circle centered conversations, which would also be linked with the Morrissey Boulevard conversations and anything else that would happen on Columbia Point.
So when we get into all those discussions with stakeholders, we'll go from Kazusko Circle out to whatever.
Exactly.
Okay. And can you also talk a little bit about the Melnia-Cass to Columbia Road?
Yep.
Improvements there, what are we thinking about? We're ready for construction, aren't we?
So there's been a number of community conversations so far. There's more still to do. A huge sort of focal point of that project is bike infrastructure. That is a key way to connect residents in your district to South Bay Harbor Trail, to Melnia-Cass, whether that means to downtown and the South Boston waterfront, or the Longwood medical area. So there's a big focus on safer crossings and bike infrastructure on that particular corridor.
And so then, beyond that, once we hit the hospital into like going towards downtown, is there a plan to connect those two areas, and where is that?
It would then connect with, at the northern end or the Melnia-Cass end, it would connect with what will be the rebuilt cycle tracks on Melnia-Cass. So we'll be rebuilding, as part of the Melnia-Cass project, cycle tracks on both sides of the street, which will go all the way over to Columbus Ave, and to the Ruggles stop there. This will also then be able to connect with the South Bay Harbor Trail, which is essentially a bike trail that goes from essentially that point down towards the West 4th Street Bridge and over into South Boston and then into the South Boston waterfront.
Where's the beginning point to that again? From Melnia-Cass and Mass Ave, there'll be a path going the other way?
Correct. The part that is under construction right now is the part which is specifically the connection between the South End and South Boston. So essentially, literally adjacent to the frontage road parcel, and then the crossings between on the West 4th Street Bridge. We then, though, will need to connect that sort of northern extent with the Mass and Melnia intersection. And there's been a number of conversations about, does that make sense on Albany? Does that make sense on Harrison? What's the right alignment for the bike connection through that corridor?
Okay, and we had talked a couple months ago about Savin Hill improvements happening there. That was supposed to happen this fall, wasn't it? We pushed off till the spring, are we?
It looks that way. I literally just before this
I wish you told me like a month ago, because I've already told people.
There's some intersection improvements at Savin Hill Ave and Savin Hill Ave, Savin Hill Ave and Grampian, and then some improvements on Old Colony Terrace as well.
Okay, so Chris, I've seen some speed humps pop up in the last couple months. What is our own guys go out, our own people go out and do that there, the public works? How much does it cost for a speed hump? When we go out and we do it, like run me through the thought process there. How do you get them? How much is it costing? How much engineering is involved in that?
I can get you the full breakdown of that. I think in general, since it's not about moving curb, it is a less expensive thing than a lot of the other things which we do around intersections.
So if it's not at an intersection, just dies into the curb, it's easier.
Right. I mean, if you're not moving the curb, if you're not impacting drainage, those are the things that tend to have the longest capital costs. It is a little bit less expensive to do, but I can get you the time and cost breakdown of that.
Now, going over to the curbstone, would they taper down into the gutters?
They
or
typically taper them down, exactly.
Taper them down, and then the water can get through.
Exactly.
So you don't really know how much
Not off the
that
top of
would
my head,
cost?
but we'll look back to you on that.
Okay, because, I mean, we talked a lot about raised crosswalks in West Roxbury, JP, downtown, the Seaport. I'm still looking for some in Dorchester and District 3. We've talked about cut-through neighborhoods, and the solution up to now was, you know what the solution is, and I don't think it's enough, So just to bring back another process that myself, my office, and an entire neighborhood went through a couple years ago to get signatures to change street patterns up in Jones Hill. That was in 15 after the disastrous winter we had. We had changed directions in South Boston. I asked people to do all this volunteer work, and then it just falls by the wayside. I have another neighborhood that I think that would be the solution to engage neighbors and look at traffic patterns, but I'm hesitant to ask neighbors to get involved if the same thing's going to happen. So kind of more of an open plea here. Can we do this? Can we look back at Jones Hill, see what happened there, what we need to do because from what I'm seeing with the weather this year, we're supposed to get another disastrous winter, so I'd rather be on the front end of that than answering the calls all year. Superintendent, how do we determine how we enforce now?
Right now, it's, a lot of it comes from the traffic data that we'll get at the district. So there's a person assigned at each district to track auto investigator activities and process citations. So he'll have some information. A lot of it's community meetings. The captain or the community service officers will go out to community meetings and hear about what the priorities of the people that live and work in that community are, and we'll deploy that way. And then just general officers' observations. There is a dedicated traffic car in each district on each shift. So those guys know where they can go out there and make the most impact. But then there's officers spread throughout each district that are taking radio calls and doing other things. But as part of their duties going from point A to point B is to enforce, with whatever available time they have, to enforce traffic laws.
So if we have one traffic analyst that will centralize that down at headquarters, will we be better off as district counselors advocating with our captains, or like how do you see that happening? Because one traffic analyst citywide seems like they might be overburdened right off the bat. So
I think if they take the data, like we have individual lieutenant detectives in each district that look at crime data. But we also take that data and do a citywide overlay. So we have a good view of what trends are coming, what trends might cross a particular district section. So absolutely, I would still advocate with your captains.
Yeah.
But I think both you and the captains would be armed with specific data.
Yeah.
So a problem may be an issue for a community that may not, there may not be a lot of speeding citations issued in a particular area, but residents may still feel the traffic is going too fast there. So even though the data may not show that there's a lot of speeding violations, it's still important, if it's important to the community, for us to take action to either increase visibility or do some design changes that make people feel like their streets are as safe as they want them to be.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor Campbell.
Councilor Wu, and thank you, Councilor Flynn, for calling for this hearing. And thank you all for the work that you do every day. I often say, city employees are overworked and underpaid. And so frankly, with the media, with respect to talking about slow streets, I always couch it in terms that we don't want to come off as beating up our city employees who are doing really hard work. I see Stephanie and her team out in my neighborhood at civic associations now, I think, every other week, walking residents through slow street plans and implementation, which is fantastic. The traffic analyst position is great. We've been in touch even before it got approved in the budget, post a hearing that I had on enforcement, and realized through that robust conversation that position would be invaluable. So that's great. I mean, steps in the right direction. We should applaud that. But I think picking up on something I think everyone said, but particularly Councilor Baker, we split Dorchester. We do ask our residents on a volunteer basis to step up, to get out there, to get involved, to gather signatures, to do petitions, applications for slow streets. And they do all those things. And then to have to go back to them and say, I'm so sorry, but we can't move on this, is extremely frustrating. And I imagine you share that frustration. I like to get things done. I don't like my time to be wasted, and I definitely don't like wasting the residents' time. So we really do need a response that is practical, that is fair and realistic. And right now I don't think that's the case. And so I just sort of have, I guess, two questions. One is, actually, just another, picking up on something else Councilor Baker said, the breakdown, I'd love to see that too on the speed humps and human capital. But for me, while I was excited, of course, to get the slow streets in my neighborhood, the last 5 applications in District 4, I agree it should be a citywide plan. We do have neighborhoods, going against each other for something we all agree they all need. BPD is doing their best. C11 and B3 are my biggest districts, and let me tell you, my captains are amazing. And Captain Fitzpatrick from B3, I call him so regularly. I think he's probably like, lady, I don't work for you. But I mean, just our guys are out there and our women are out there doing incredible work. Enforcement is just one piece. The rest has to involve structural changes and other plans and ideas that have come forward. We have those. We know what we need to do. So out of the last budget hearing, or at the last budget hearing, this came up where I was specifically asking, what are the barriers? If it is resources, if it's human capital, I know maybe we need more engineers, all of that. But what are the barriers? Because at the end of the day, we need to just be pouring into what I hope should be a citywide plan, not an application process. We've already had to push off the Slow Streets application process after promising some residents that were denied the last time around that they could apply in the next round. And so whatever those barriers are, I want to make sure I'm using my voice, this platform, and my advocacy skills to say, do away with those overnight so our departments are equipped to meet the needs, the pressing needs of these concerns, because people are dying. Or the 7-year-old, of course, that just got hit in my district, and by the grace of God, he's doing fine, but people are not, in some instances, living, and that's just not okay. It's just as serious as stabbings or homicides. And so in that case, I think we just have to do a lot more, Chief.
Agreed.
Barriers.
So I think the principal barriers that we were, and to some degree we are facing, are the two that you listed. Sort of the human capital. Do we have the staff to be doing the planning, the designing, and the construction management? And do we have the capital funds to go as fast as we would like? That is why we have, again, sort of doubled the number of planners. We've added 6 more engineers across public works and transportation, and then 4 more construction managers. A huge focus for that team is the Neighborhood Slow Streets program. We have staffed up almost all of those positions at this point in time, which would then give me a better ability to say, this is how many neighborhood slow streets we can do, what the actual pace is that we can do, how many miles of streets we can reimagine, residential streets we can reimagine for road safety. I think, and again, we'll get into this tomorrow in our TNC conversation, there are additional sources of revenue where there is, and resources specific to transportation, specific to road safety, which we are going to be targeting, both to rapid response, but also our Neighborhood Slow Streets program. So I think we have the capacity to scale up beyond where we are right now. What I don't want to do, to your point about realistic expectations, though, is to overpromise what it is that we can do now that we've staffed up to get to the point where we know we can deliver on what we've promised publicly. I want to get into sort of that process and figure out then how fast can we accelerate from there. And
currently, for the neighborhoods that were actually approved already for Slow Streets applications, the timeline for those isn't a year. It's what, 2 or 3 years?
Tends to be 2 years. Correct.
2 years. And that doesn't, of course, include neighborhoods that have separate requests in terms of structural changes or other things. So what level of resources in terms of numbers? What are the numbers that we're talking about? When you're sort of sitting with, Chief of BTD, I think you guys are sitting down and talking about, or with Slow Streets or Charlotte from Vision Zero, when you guys are all sitting down, or with BTD, of course, around enforcement, and going through actual numbers and figuring out what it might take, not only to realize or implement the current applications, but to respond to the cases that are coming in. Yes. What's the numbers that you're looking at? Is it 20 million? Is it 30 million? Is it 100 million?
So that is, and I think the gentleman left, but the person who was sitting over there, that is some work which he is doing right now to help us think through exactly this. How do we prioritize those requests? How do we accelerate our ability to respond to them? It is a huge priority for us. And something which, as we build this next budget, we need to be very specific about here's what it will take. And again, I think there's an opportunity to talk about resources tomorrow that would be linked to that.
And just, is there a range at least?
So to think about what we're...
Because we didn't have a number at the last budget hearing because we had to do some more thinking around what it would take.
So the revenue which we've brought in total is $13 million. So it's $5 million from the increase in the parking meters, $5 million from the increase in parking fines, and roughly $3 million was what was originally budgeted from the TNC assessments. That has been what has been allowed us to fund not just the Neighborhood Slow Streets program at the larger scale, but also things like our transit team and groups like that. It's now that we're thinking about what the next round of resources is, that we can, I think, figure out if we want to go even faster than we're going right now. What type of resources is that? Is that contract structure? Is that process? Is that additional engineers or additional planners? And then how do we actually fund that through, whether it's TNC assessments or otherwise?
Otherwise. And then I guess my last question is, I'm just curious, but every department submits to the administration, obviously, a number of, well, what they would like, and then you get what you get. What was the number, I'm curious, that you submitted to the administration during the last budget? Which, of course, what you received is not exactly what you submit.
I don't know, and I can get back to that.
That would be great.
Yep.
Because I do know that, every department obviously comes up, I imagine, with their dream number, and then there's a process with the budget office, of course, to figure out what's doable and what isn't. So I'd be curious to know what that number is. And, here to continue advocating with you guys, I'm like a broken record. I am on the record about going out and building speed humps on my house, or the road in front of my house. Apparently that landed well with some, maybe not others. But it really is that bad in certain neighborhoods, particularly if you are sitting out and just watching cars speed by, and particularly in some neighborhoods with seniors that have the time to sit and actually count cars for us and then report back what they're seeing. And so look forward to being a partner in the work. Councilor Flynn, thank you for calling for the hearing and continuing the conversation. And thank you guys in your respective departments for what you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Councilor Sabi-George.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Councilor Flynn. Many of my questions were answered, but I just want to double down on a few of them. I'm not sure if we talked very specifically about just the enforcement of certain behaviors, but that is one way to change some of the bad roadway behaviors. And so I know you touched on it, but if you don't mind, just sort of going over it one more time. Enforcement in general, speeding, stop signs, crosswalks.
So enforcement is undertaken by, generally, each district has, they call it Tango 55 cars. It basically means it's a dedicated traffic enforcement car, at least on days in first half. Most districts also have a midnight last half shift that's dedicated to that. But specific for crosswalk, each district is expected to do a number of times a week dedicated crosswalk enforcement as well. So that's basically the pedestrian targeted crosswalk aspect of it. So that's under the umbrella of the typical district captains getting feedback from the community service officers and the citizens that they talk to at their community meetings, and targeting enforcement based on feedback from the community.
And have we measured that revenue from that enforcement over time?
Revenue from enforcement from the BPD? No, not to my knowledge.
It would be interesting to see sort of the differences by district and by ticket type. And I appreciate, and I want to appreciate that sometimes it doesn't always end up with a fine, that there are warnings given and a lot of driver education that happens, as well as bicyclist education. I know that happens across the city as well. It would be interesting to see some of that information after today's hearing.
Sure, and that is our focus. We do track whether a fine or a warning is given, and we can probably get the financial data on as well. But our emphasis to the officers is always on changing behavior, and the revenue part, not that it doesn't matter, but that's not the focus of our officers out there.
Great, thank you for that. And can you tell me why it's been 5 months since we still haven't hired the crash analyst?
I'm not sure how long the process typically takes. I know we're at the end of it now. My understanding is that analyst will be on board in the next week or two. I know when we first discussed it at the city council hearing, that was not a position that was allocated. So it was allocated between now and then I'm not sure what the hiring process lead time usually is, but I would say it would probably be at least a couple of months for a new position to get that posted.
We think in the next week, though?
That's my understanding.
Great.
Yeah.
And then how are we, when we're talking about any of these slow streets or changes to street patterns and adding of lanes and any shifts, what's our relationship with the state and DCR, Mass DOT in some of those efforts? Because I imagine that creates some breaks in service along the way. I'm not sure who, no, this isn't so much an enforcement as much as an infrastructure question.
It'll often come up particularly with our planning group within BTD. Think of Center Street, for example, which at various points is managed by DCR, or Columbia Road, various points is managed by DCR, and some points managed by us. So we do have a good coordination with DCR around sort of where our property meets theirs. I think there's an opportunity, though, for us to think about how we might collectively do something like Columbia Road together that would be able to accelerate the work that we want to get done.
Right. And then I know Councilor O'Malley brought up the speed humps and the raised crosswalks, huge proponent of them, especially at our schools, at our playgrounds, and at our senior centers and housing developments. That's it from me, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I know Councilor O'Malley at least has another few.
That's fine.
Okay, I'm going to assert a few of mine as well, and then we'll do a quick swing through to see if there's anything that sparked, and then we'll move to public testimony. So, sorry, just to back up, and I know these stats, I should know them by now. They're probably, tattooed in your in your brain. So, how many miles of roadway total in Boston?
850.
850. And it was also 850 traffic signals?
Yes.
Okay. And of those, how many have cameras now?
Probably also about 2/3 of those, and we'll get you the exact number, are connected back to the traffic management center here on the 7th floor. I'm not sure if every single one of those has a traffic camera associated with it, but if, we can get that information for you.
Okay. And how many cars are driving through Boston sort of on a daily basis?
I'm trying to remember from the Go Boston stat. We can pull that for you. It's in the stats pages of Go Boston. We'll grab that for you.
And does it also describe the number of pedestrians now?
Exactly.
Okay. So in Go Boston 2030, the goals set out include increasing the share of commuting by walking and by cycling, 14% walking, increase of 14% walking, increase of 2% biking, a decrease of 39% people driving alone. Where are we sort of, if you took a snapshot today relative to when the plan was proposed?
So the data which was collected in the Go Boston plan is sort of a rolling average of ACS data. So we have seen some general increase in some of the cycling numbers. We've not done sort of a new census, and obviously this next year's census will be a big benchmark for this, a new census for commute to numbers. What we have in the plan, though, is going from 14% walking to 21%, from 2% biking to 8% biking, from 33% transit to 44% transit, which would mean a decline in the percentage of people who have to drive alone from where we are today to close to around 20%.
Oh, sorry, I must have misread quickly. So those are the numbers that we are at shared today. Okay.
Exactly.
And so the goals are actually
I think we might have used
bigger
like
for cycling and
exactly,
smaller for walking. But we don't have a good sense at this moment of where we are sort of relative to those.
We'll pull some of those. It really relies right now on ACS data. Next year's census will actually be will give us the most accurate read. And those are Boston residents commute. The commuting for Boston residents. Most of the cars we actually see on city streets are residents during commute times or people are commuting into the city of Boston because there aren't viable alternatives for them.
Okay. And so how are you thinking about the kind of shifting dynamic of both ideally fewer people driving cars in single occupancy vehicles, but also more people walking? Does that, in general, do you feel like it will be fewer interactions between pedestrians and cars with that kind of shift, or is it still going to be more and more as we're seeing across the country, and it's about putting in the ways to manage those interactions?
I think the infrastructure is essential. I think on the pedestrian side in particular, it is how we build, which is really going to make the biggest impact for that particular line in the mode shift. If we are building sort of live, work, and play areas within the city of Boston, you're going to get a higher percentage of people who are walking to work. The places that have the highest walk to work percentages in the city of Boston are the downtown neighborhoods and places like the Longwood Medical area. So those are it has a little bit more to do with the land use, but certainly building the great pedestrian infrastructure is going to be essential.
And then again, I could have gotten this wrong on just a quick scan right now. So one of the goals, I thought it said a decrease of 30% in terms of collisions.
It's to have 0 roadway fatalities and 0 serious injuries by 2030. There might have been a collision-specific number, but I don't recall it.
Okay, there was a quick stat that it was 1,279 collisions total in 2014, aiming for 895.
Okay.
Do we have a snapshot of where that is today?
Yeah. So the most recent stats, we might have something more recent than this, but is through 2018 is the end of the Vision Zero annual report. I think it's the final page. So in 2017, there were 772 crashes that involved pedestrians, 390 that involved cyclists, and 3,375 that involved motorists. That is a decline in the number for pedestrians in comparison to 2016, and it's a decline in the number of cyclists, but it's an increase in the number for motorists.
Okay, got it. And what's the best way to kind of see what the progress is year by year or in a regular frequency of progress to these goals?
So it's a great question. So we just launched 2 weeks ago, a new Go Boston 2030 webpage, which gives an update on all 58 projects and policies, as well as some of the key stats. There is a degree of sort of tracking the actual metrics, though, that we want to do some additional work on. So we're fortunate to receive a grant that dives in specifically at identifying what are the metrics that we want to be tracking, many of which, to your point, are in Go Boston 2030, and then how do we make sure we're regularly reporting those on the city's website.
So does there exist anywhere kind of an annual look back at just what we've done, or?
So that's what's on there's a specific Vision Zero one, which is on the city's webpage, as well as the Go Boston 2030 sort of new webpage that just got released about 2 weeks ago.
But that will be just kind of whatever is the snapshot at the moment, or will it also feature kind of ongoing? Will it feature the data over time, so you could go back and see year to year, or even month to month?
If it doesn't, it should, and we will.
Okay.
That's a great suggestion.
And then just to go back briefly to actually where we started the hearing with Scott Burke and his incredibly painful and powerful testimony to hear that this was an issue in a particular location that had been flagged again and again. What is the current policy for feedback that either BTD or in general the administration receives, and how does it get through to either you or whoever it needs to get to?
Sure. So the city will take through in one request or requests from city councilors. They'll get assigned to the relevant division to review and to respond to. And obviously, my heart goes out to the family here. And there's work which in every single crash that happens and every fatality that happens on city streets, which is a moment for us to see what can we be doing better going forward, and clearly there's an opportunity here.
So in this case, was it received, it went to 311, and then was just deemed safe that there's nothing needed, or was it not received, or?
I can get back to you about the specifics on this one, in this case.
Okay, because there are many such, many of us have been knocking on many doors over the last couple months, and the number of places identified that are just waiting for the next tragedy is unbelievable. And as I've said, I think you've heard the frustration from several of us here about the way that it feels our safety resources are being rationed out by only kind of after something major has happened, and that there is much more need for proactive, resident-driven analysis that is not requiring people to jump through hoops of securing letters of recommendation and this and that and signatures and all that. If at the end of the day, the choices are being made through metrics that are available anyway in terms of proportion of the population that are seniors or youth, et cetera, people should not have to be begging the city for safe streets when, and when there is something flagged, when there is feedback given, it shouldn't be, well, let's wait until something awful happens to get back to you. So I would love to just, even on this particular instance, so at least my office in the capacity as a committee chair could report back to Mr. Burke, just as a case study of what happened, and I would just love to know.
Yep.
And then, so in general, when we are as counselors or as residents experiencing places where it feels something is unsafe, either because of the signal or something else, it's not quite, something's clearly broken and therefore you put it on 311, what should we do?
If there is a safety concern, I would recommend describing the situation through 311. It'll get to the BTT team, the Public Works team, to my team, and for our review.
Okay. And is it, I just hope, because sometimes I've heard, not necessarily from the city, but from other types of agencies or entities, that there's kind of a waiting to see how many people are complaining about a certain area before something happens, or as a way to help prioritize. I don't know if you could walk us through, when you do get those requests, how are you making decisions about how to use resources?
So we can sort of go through exactly that process. It's going to be a little bit different, probably division by division, how the planning department versus the engineering department might review a particular request, but we can walk through that with you.
Okay, that would be great. One of my pet peeves is when any public agency is telling people, well, you just didn't complain enough or organize your neighbors enough, or kind of putting the burden on residents. Even one person flagging something that is unsafe, I hope will rise to the level of being addressed. And then just a little on the signalization and the change in policies. Does this is mentioned in Go Boston 2030 as well. Is that kind of project within Go Boston 2030 considered complete, or what's the status?
As Brendan referenced, there is additional work, which, as we discussed, additional work which is in front of us that we've engaged a contractor to be our partner on.
And what are next steps or timelines? Or?
So I don't have a specific timeline, but I think the contractor is on board right now, and we can sort of get the exact next steps for you on that. Okay.
And then just finally on staffing. So I'd love to understand, great to see some more people on board, and particularly on the traffic analyst side, that there will be even more in a short period of time. How many more staff members are you looking to put in each of those categories, or are we kind of at the plateau for now in terms of staffing up?
We have, I don't think there's ever sort of a plateau. There's always, as I think we all know, more work to be done. I think, though, we want to understand what the right next set of investments are, and that's a bit of work which we're doing as we look towards the FY21 capital budget and operating budget.
So you anticipate that will it be, as many engineers added as in the previous cycle, as many new construction managers and liaisons, or
I think we want to look at what's the way we can ramp up neighborhood slow streets program, our spot interventions, and the major corridor work, and then what's the operating and capital budget that makes the most sense to be able to get it to really be responsive to what all of us feel, all of you advocate for, and we know our constituents most want.
Okay. So at this moment, how many neighborhood slow streets applications are there that have not been accepted over all the years of applications?
I'll get you that. I think we had 37 applications in total in the last round, but we can get you, for both rounds, how many applications there were.
Okay, and I think it was something even more than that. If my memory was right, it was something like way higher for the year before. I wasn't following this last round. So I'd be curious, just is it that now it's just the sum of those two, or did people just reapply? So I'd like to know how many outstanding there were. And then, let's see, my last question, what in terms of following up on staffing, what is done internally versus still has to be contracted out to vendors? How has that balance changed over the last year?
Sure. So we have additional in-house capacity, but we are relying heavily on vendors to assist with our contractors, certainly on the construction side and to some degree on the design side as well, which allows us to simply go faster.
What are the types of projects that now we can do in-house, and what do we still have to put out in terms of, for example, let's say design?
So there are some, as I understand, there's some specific and smaller scale engineering work which we may be able to do in-house. It's the larger projects, though, which are done through an outside contractor. So
if a speed hump, we do all in-house, protected cycle track along a corridor would have to go out, or?
To my knowledge, all of those are currently done through outside contractors, but we can get that breakdown.
Okay.
It relates to Councilor Baker's question as well.
All right, thank you. Councilor Flynn, any questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor. I was talking to Councilor Flaherty earlier, and he had a prior appointment. He wanted to be here. He was asking about Is there any plan down the road to have a dedicated, staffed, fully funded traffic division in each police precinct?
No, I mean, we've always had the motorcycle unit, and they have multiple duties. I would say that the quickest, most efficient way to have something that would resemble a dedicated traffic unit would be to add to that, and we could do that incrementally, which would probably be the only way we'd be adding to any particular unit would be incrementally for the foreseeable future. We have an academy that should start next month to the tune of about 125 officers. But between now and when that academy graduates, we're at risk of losing at least that number to retirement. So there's a follow-on planned right after that academy. So that's our first opportunity to pick up additional officers would be in that second academy. So I think we're at a point where creating a new unit, which would come with new supervisory personnel and new logistical requirements, would probably be a bridge too far this year. But plussing up existing units is not. We could probably make some adjustments and reallocate priorities as needed, as we typically do. We're always pretty pretty well in the cycle of analyzing where our resources are directed, and are always open to changing those assignments as needed.
Thank you, Deputy. And yeah, that was one of the questions besides Council Flaherty. I was at a recent South End Forum meeting, and that's what some of the residents were asking, if that's at all possible. So I just wanted to follow up on that. And then my last question is, when you're coming off the highway off of Dorchester at UMass Boston and coming into South Boston along the boulevard and going past the state police station and taking a left turn on L Street, and just the level of speed people are going, it's as if they're still on the expressway. And although the speed limit is only 25 miles an hour, we have some cars going 40, 45, 50 miles an hour. There is a BHA elderly development, and a lot of young families are walking to school. There's a couple schools nearby, but that was always a concern of mine, is just the level of speed that, continues from the highway system onto the boulevard and then right through our neighborhood is very concerning to me. As a resident, I see too many seniors walking, and they're in the crosswalk, and someone might drive by them 50 miles an hour. I see persons with disabilities trying to cross the street, and the same issue, and I see mothers taking their children to school as well. How do we address the issue of the level of speed in our neighborhoods, especially the real residential dense neighborhoods?
Sure. I think both Day Boulevard and L Street are examples of some of the things which you can do, and also the distance we still have to go. So obviously on Day Boulevard, DCR put in a road diet, added better bike facilities, added temporary rumble strips. On L Street, we've daylit a number of intersections. On the side streets, we've added some speed humps. We've put in, I believe, some speed feedback signs along that corridor as well, all with exactly this intent, how we actually need to calm traffic and slow speeds, improve our intersections across the city. That general toolkit, things that do encourage drivers to go slowly, that do improve sight lines between people behind the wheel and people on the street, or people who might be approaching an intersection. Those are the things which we're very focused on. I think there's an opportunity as we think about future designs that are around Kosciuszko Circle and some of the other state infrastructure that's associated with that, such as Day Boulevard, to think about how we can even better transition people from the speed they might have been going on 93 to make it clearer that they're going to be they're in a residential or approaching a residential area.
Yeah, those speed humps on the boulevard are effective. And I wish we had a couple more of them on L Street itself. I think they would be effective in slowing down the speed in these residential neighborhoods. Again, I know during the budget process, I'm going to advocate as hard as I possibly can for the Transportation Department to make sure that you have all the resources you need so you can do your job properly. And I do want to acknowledge and thank the dedicated staff from Transportation for your great work too. You are professional, you are hardworking, and you know, we want to continue working with you to make some major changes throughout the neighborhood. So I just want to say thank you to the panelists here. I'm also looking forward to hearing more about some of the comments from the public that's also waiting as well. Thank you, Councilor Wu.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Malley? Okay, so let's proceed to public testimony, and feel free, you could sit in the stands if you like, or feel free to watch the tape later as well, but we appreciate your time on the panel, but don't feel like you're captive to stay down here. The three residents who have signed up to testify so far are Tom Reddy, David Vieira, and Allison Pultinas. And we'll do a quick check of the sign-in sheets to see if there's anyone else. But if those three could make your way down to the microphones.
Thank you, Councilor. Hi, Tom Reddy from the Fort Point Seaport Neighborhood Association. We do appreciate the fact that we're having this hearing today, and we appreciate the effort city staff is putting in. And we acknowledge there has been some improvement, candidly, across the city as it relates to safety for pedestrians and bicyclists, but candidly, we haven't seen it in our neighborhood. So let's talk facts. Over the last 3 years, we've seen a 180% increase in the number of people hit by cars in our neighborhood. We've seen a 120% increase in the number of bicyclists hit by cars in our neighborhood. And we just had somebody die, as we all discussed, Diane Lee. Let's talk about Diane. Could I have that? Let me introduce you to Diane. This is Diane Lee. She was a visitor to Boston. She was in town having dinner with her fiance, walking across the crosswalk with a lit walk signal on Summer Street at 9:15 on a Wednesday evening, and was run down and killed. And by the way, this particular intersection, Scott mentioned it, complaints against it, but more importantly, Summer Street had recently had all of the re-engineered Vision Zero crosswalks signaling put in place, including leading pedestrian indicators, and obviously it didn't help. Right? So we've got a crisis in our neighborhood, and we need the city's assistance to try to help us. Right? We recognize there's efforts that are underway, but frankly, we need more. Right? Let's talk about the designs, Chris. I guess we would advocate, based on our observations, that the designs, whether it's the intersection Diane was killed in, intersection timings along Seaport Boulevard, along Summer Street, frankly, one size does not fit all, and you need to take some input from the people that live in those communities about what works better in certain instances versus another. And secondly, we need to come up with a consistent and cohesive approach that's in line with state agencies. We're not the only community that has a mix of Boston Transportation Responsibility and state agencies such as DCR or MassDOT, but candidly, the designs aren't coordinated and in sync. Right? We can speak firsthand about that. The second, this discussion that's been going on around education, we applaud that effort. But frankly, it's a communication effort that's needed, not just education. And it's a communication effort to not just the citizens of Boston, the residents of Boston, but everybody that comes in and out of our city every single day. So whilst we're doing it, we may think we're doing an effective job reaching out to particular residents of particular neighborhoods, we don't touch upon the commuters that come and go every day. And in our particular neighborhood, even though we've got 5,000 housing units now, more than 45,000 people come to work every day there, and more than 40% of them have walking as part of their commute. Right? So they are on the streets. They may drive in, but Scott's office is a good example. They park down the street and walk. right? So we have to find a way of reaching those particular groups. And then lastly, I'd say enforcement continues to be a burr under our saddle anyway. Candidly, the stagnant staffing levels that have existed for years at Boston Police and at Boston Transportation are not helping us, right? I recognize that all of these teams do good work. They need more people, and they need a different organizational model, right? Frankly, 2 people in our district at C6 responsible for traffic enforcement across all of South Boston is not sufficient. So something needs to be done there, and these, the officers we require more officers. They require more money, and they require a different level of priority. So, councilors, that would be the feedback we'd give you from our neighborhood, right? This city can do better, and we're looking forward to seeing the outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Good afternoon, councilors. My name is David Vieira. I am a resident of Hyde Park. I have a vision impairment. I attend the meetings of the Disability Commission regularly. I'm very glad that we're having this hearing today. I've been to several other hearings, both with the Disability Commission and here with the City Council on the subject of traffic. There is a definite need for a 4-way stop at some of these major intersections. I'm on the board of the citywide Friends of the Library in Copley Square, and I am in Copley Square regularly. And trying to cross some of these streets when, as it has been previously stated, both the pedestrian and the vehicle seem to have the right of way, it's like walking across an arcade with go-karts on some of these sidewalks and crosswalks. Another thing that I see not only in Copley Square but across the city, and I know that one of the people from the department talked about crosswalk striping. I've talked to that department about crosswalk striping, and I've been told that the stripers go around and they have different neighborhoods they go to on a schedule. So meanwhile, they're in West Roxbury, and the stripes in the middle of Copley Square have already worn off, and someone like myself really depends on good striping to get across the street safely. And I had suggested that perhaps there could be one part of that team that responds to phone calls from constituents that call up, like myself, done it several times, and I've said the crosswalk at streets X and Y are worn out and need to be replaced. I had a meeting a couple of years ago with the urban mechanics, and they were kind enough to ask me for my views on things like that. And one of my recommendations was to have a pilot program to paint the crosswalks yellow. In a snow area, when the snow is covering the street or it's irregular, I think yellow crosswalks would be a great improvement on getting people across the street. Excuse me, I have to look at my notes. Oh. So, audible signals. The audible signals at some of the crosswalks do not work. There's no uniform sound to those audible crosswalk signals. Some of them beep, some of them chirp, some of them are silent. There is none. There has to be a uniform sound at the crosswalks, especially for people who are vision impaired. There is sometimes when I don't know whether I'm listening to a crosswalk signal or somebody's weird cell phone going off. It's very, very confusing. If as they get replaced, the city could decide on a uniform audible crosswalk signal, that would be extremely helpful. More time needs to be put on the countdown clock also. There are some crosswalks that you have to get across the street in 8 or 9 seconds. And some of us, especially the elderly, can't really do that safely without speeding up and having the possibility of tripping. Another thing about the crosswalks is that very often there are manhole covers in the middle of the crosswalk. And when it's raining, when it's snowing, you can't really see that manhole cover that you're going to trip on, especially some of the older ones with the bumps on them or with raised lettering on them. Perhaps those could also be painted yellow to help with folks crossing the streets. So I'm going to take a minute to talk about bikes. Some of you, many of you will remember that there was someone who used to work in this building who said, "The car is no longer king in Boston." You remember that? Well, the car hasn't gone away. We are overwhelmed with cars, and we are now also overwhelmed with bikes. The bikes are riding through crosswalks where there are active pedestrians walking across the crosswalks. They're going down the wrong way on a one-way street. If I'm looking to the right to see if there's traffic coming and I start to cross and a biker whizzes by me from the left, that's not very helpful. Bikes are driving on sidewalks. Bikes are parking in places that are inappropriate. I have had meetings with Captain Dan Alecki from the Boston Police Department, from Captain Andres from the Boston Police Department. I have personally toured Copley Square with both of these officers who at the time were designated bike enforcement officers for the city of Boston. These bike rules do not get enforced. I've never seen any bike stopped for any infraction at any time in any neighborhood for any reason. Chapter 85 of the Mass General Laws have specific rules about where you can park your bike, when you can ride your bike safely, and how to properly engage in traffic requirements so that the pedestrians are safe. With all due respect to bikers, I had 3 bikes once. I used to be a biker. I used to love biking. I miss it myself. But it seems that the bikers have the entire agenda on their side. I understand their concerns about being doored, about being cut off, and about being hit. They need to be recognized and they need to be respected. They, in turn, need to respect the rules of the road and the safety of the pedestrians in the city.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Vera. And after Allison will be Matt Lawler.
Hi, my name is Allison Pultinus, and I want to focus on the actual design issue that was brought up in the order for the hearing, the conflict between turning vehicles and pedestrians. And I really appreciate the people who spoke about Diane, who died on Summer Street. Very moving testimony and really a call to action. This issue of cars that have the right to turn right on red, or cars that have a green and are allowed to turn while the pedestrian has a walk signal is very complicated and deserves a lot of analysis. And Chief Osgood said that they are working on a criteria for judging where to change signals at intersections related to this, but it's I just haven't heard enough details. And honestly, related to Melnia Cass, and he knows that I've talked about Melnia Cass a lot, but right now, Washington and Melnia Cass, you have right-turning vehicles from Washington that turn, they're going west on Melnia Cass, and the pedestrians from the hotel from South End crossing to Dudley are, definitely in danger. You have the buses and other cars turning from Dudley Square, making lefts onto Melnia Cass, heading west, same thing. So there has to be a criteria that is looking at the speed on these corridors, and that has to be one of the determining factors whether it's going to be an all-way stop, because obviously a leading pedestrian interval is not going to help. It doesn't help when the car is going so fast that it actually can't stop in time, or the drivers are coming off of a highway ramp and they aren't conscious enough of pedestrians in that area. So those intersections, and again, that intersection in the new design, the signals are push button, and that's wrong. But at the same time that you're looking at these corridors and saying, okay, where are the people driving too fast, and where are the pedestrians that are going to be endangered, you also have to think of what happens to the wait time for those pedestrians. And if it's really long, there has to be a balance. And so that's tricky. I mean, you have the very successful Longwood Avenue, Brookline Ave four-way stop, but that is a long wait, but people are used to it. If the wait is going to be so long that you're going to create a hazard with people trying to jaywalk, something has to change. So this is a very complicated analysis, and I really hope that the public can be more involved with thinking about these intersections, because I know Walk Boston in the past always advocated for concurrent signals, but it's not safe. It's not safe when you have traffic that's going 40 miles an hour. And just to go back a little bit with specific intersections that could use this, Park Drive in Boylston is a very complicated, obviously, intersection. Intersections not only where cars are going fast, but also where you have a lot of commuter traffic and traffic of people who are new to the area or driving to destinations where there's a lot of activity. You need the four-way stop. One more thought, and this is related to my counselor, Counselor O'Malley. South Huntington Avenue and Heath Street. You have traffic, and you also have to think about where are the vehicles where they are accelerating, going uphill. They put on the gas pedal and they're going uphill towards Perkins Street, and yet you have pedestrians who are trying to cross from the train station, going over to Sherrill House and Hope Lodge. And in the dark, it's a crazy intersection. We need some change there.
Thank you, Allison.
Okay, one more thought. School bus areas and some schools have the 20-mile-an-hour slow sign, and it's working, and in fact, it's never turned off. It's even working on Saturday and Sunday. Other schools, Fisher Avenue, the school sign, it's not working most of the time, and the kids are crossing Fisher Ave to go to their daily gym at McLaughlin Playground, and they have to have multiple adults stopping traffic. Fisher Ave is a speed zone. I have seen cars passing each other, and it's been mentioned at neighborhood meetings, but again, the neighborhood police officer said, well, you have to go to talk to the traffic officer. I can't take that complaint. So just, again, reflecting on where are the areas where community people are being asked to do multiple complaints, and yet maybe it's an area that the city should be paying attention to themselves. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Matt Lawler from Walk Up Roslindale, and thanks very much for the opportunity, councilors, to be able to offer testimony and thoughts to the city. I think a comment and two questions for the folks from BTD. The theme today, I think, at least at some level, has been neighborhood slow streets, and I would emphasize this has been a program that a lot of us who've been advocates have had the same critique since it started, that it should be rolled out much faster than it's been rolled out, and it needs to be done everywhere in the city. It is really just sort of one of those like fundamental things. Everyone in the city should live on a safe street. They should work on a safe street. They should play on a safe street. So rationing out safety, I think, as many of the councilors have said, sort of cuts against the grain of sort of a fundamental reason why people want to live in the city and live in Boston. So the suggestion really would be that the program needs to go like 10 times faster than it is. And anything less than that is sort of, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it's a refusal to appreciate how much people want this program, right? I mean, the numbers, I think, in the first round were over 50 applications, and Walk Up Roslindale, we encouraged many of our neighbors. We actually held a meeting before the first round to get people to put applications in. We gave technical assistance to folks who were interested in that. And then when the program kind of came out, it was, disappointing. And we knew going in that it was somewhat of a lottery, but it was still the kind of thing where this is a situation where we need to roll this out just much faster. So two questions. I think it's been mentioned somewhat, but the 10 sites or the 10 areas that are currently in the program, they're going to be done next year. Is that definite?
So there are 12 locations.
Yeah, there were two pilots. They're done, right?
Definitely be in construction, and then 5 more we're going through the process right now.
Okay.
To your point, Matt, we completely agree. It's much faster.
Yeah, thank you. And so, but I would say that 2 years for the second round is too slow. So we've got to figure out a way to make this go faster. So I would hope that the next 5 are done in 2020. It's taking too long. And then the second thing I would say is it really wasn't announced that there wasn't going to be a round this year. And so I want to register as an advocate and as a resident disappointment that there was no round at all. And I don't think it was really communicated to folks in the community or advocates around this that there wasn't going to be one. And I would like to sort of hear sort of what was the thinking? Like why, we advocated for more budget, we advocated for more staff. Those things happened, and then we didn't really get around, even of the sort of very small program we have. So what exactly happened to 2019? Like, why did we not get one?
Really, it's actually something with both crazy ways. How can we go faster, and how can we prioritize? I think maybe disagree, but I think we generally agree that we should prioritize those places who are the most vulnerable. Not a prioritization process.
It is, although I would say that it certainly prioritizes the places that have all those things, and I would say there's actually, like, most of the city has that, right? Seniors live everywhere, kids are everywhere, schools are everywhere, library, I mean, like...
It's not a question of where we make it.
Chief, could you just, I want to make sure the video captures you as well.
Sorry.
So it's not an issue of where there should be areas. I think we all agree every street needs this sort of. The question is simply where do we start? Where's the places that we should be prioritizing? Part of what came up is how do we go faster? Part of that is actually figuring out like what's the staffing and the contracting and the process that allows us to go faster.
Right.
We've had the good fortune of being able to actually make some changes, again, with the council's support around parking fines, around parking meters, that allows us to actually significantly increase our staff. We're going through the process now of figuring out then how fast can we go. I don't want to do another round before we know this is really what we can deliver. So we're going through that process right now.
All right.
The interest is certainly to expand and accelerate the program.
Great.
But I don't want to do that, to Councilor Campbell's point, without a realistic expectation of what that means.
Yeah, no, certainly. So don't overpromise, but at the same time, we'd love it if it went a lot faster.
I hear you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Any closing thoughts from my colleagues? Councilor Flynn? Oh, sorry, and I'll make one last call. Actually, I apologize. If you have not signed up to testify but you feel moved, please come on down.
John Provenzano.
I signed in, but I signed in late.
Oh, sorry, John.
First of all, I want to thank the councilors for what they're doing with this hearing and thank the panel. In my 23 years as a union officer, I know, and on the board of directors of the credit union, whenever we get some problem squared away, the first thing what I did was thank the staff that worked to get those problems solved. So I want to thank the officer and counselors and all. The first, I made a bunch of notes, but I'm going to make it quick, Counselor. The gentleman that just spoke was talking about trying to get things done, and it's just a simple thought. My dad used to teach me, keep things simple and you'll get it done a lot quicker. Is there a chance that sometimes with this, the problem that we're dealing with the traffic lights, and I watched them install that, took 2 days to change, selfishly I'll talk about Day Boulevard and L Street, and they changed it so that it's identical to the one that Diane had gotten killed at, that type of setup. If in a pilot program, could we just change a couple of them to see if that would make a difference? Because this is definitely going to happen again. There's no question in my mind that there's going to be another fatality. My daughter has gotten hit the same intersection that Eddie, you were talking about with Ms. Donovan. My daughter got hit there on her bike a couple of years ago. I have a list. I've been a resident of South Boston my whole life, and I have a list of people, and I'm not going to bring up all the names. I'm going to bring up one, and I'm going to do this because I carry this with me, and the gentleman that showed the picture. And this is being maybe a little bit dramatic, but little Colin that got killed a year ago, he's not going to be a counselor. He's not going to be a city. He's not going to grow to be one of you people that are in charge of getting things done. And that's how quick we have to move on some of this stuff. And my small mind says that in pilot programs, I sympathize with Mr. O'Malley. My 87-year-old friend lives right at that corner at Park and Center Street. It's happening around the city. We're like New York City now. We're not the small Boston city that we were from years ago. We're just loaded with people, loaded with cars. So we have to act quicker. And I guess I'm saying with pilot programs, just to say, I'm going to make a simple thing selfishly in my town, and I know it could be done in every town, the Asian community, it could be done in West Roxbury. When we have a celebration of, say, if it's something in the summer or if it's Christmas season, I see banners. A big banner will be typed up. This is very simple, but it might even help with the stop signs and the pedestrian signs, which I have to thank the council on that. I testified a year ago this month on getting and you helped me out with telling me what that was that we were going to use for the pedestrian signs with the blinking lights, and that works immensely. It works so much better. But if we put just banners, and this wouldn't cost us a lot of money, and I'll contribute some money if I have to get my neighbors to, but banners on certain streets, selfishly, Broadway in my town, Broadway, L Street, Andrews Square, Center Street, a few of the major highways, and all it has to say is, please slow down. Whatever we want to call it, to put on that banner, and maybe some of the people that are driving down the street, they'll pick up on that. Just that banner might slow down some because they are driving fast. Not to blame just the drivers, but the pedestrians, and being the age that I am, I'll call them the funny phones. But, you know, the young people that are crossing the street looking at their funny phones is just as guilty as the driver that's coming up L Street, which this morning, Eddie, I swear as I'm standing here, it happened again. I tried to cross on Marine, where your mom and dad live, where I live, to cross that street, and this fella came up the street, and if he wasn't doing at least 40, that's being conservative. That particular intersection, numerous people have gotten hit in that corner at L and Marine Road. So what Ed was talking about, coming from Day Boulevard and turning up, there's a simple way, like I was saying about the banners, and then there's the electronic way. I don't know what the ACLU thinks about it, but you know, they're complaining about cameras or whatever. Cameras aren't going to slow the people down. Yeah, we'll get them for $50 or whatever on a ticket, but that's not going to do it. If I could just give this example, Commissioner, if you and I were driving on the highway, and I've met with you guys, and I appreciate it for what, but I wanted to say it for everyone that maybe we could push this. If we were driving down the highway and you were doing 60, and I'm 300, 400 yards behind you, and I'm doing 75, which is against the law to begin with, but I'm doing 75 and I'm locked in on my cruise control, that most of the new cars, and my car included, which is a leased car, on cruise control, when I get up to at least 100 yards behind your car that's doing 60, my car automatically goes down to 60. Whoever is driving in front of me, that car. So and I'm not into the computer stuff, and I know you can help me out with this, but the electronic brains that are in these cars now, if we could apply that to just on a pilot program, Center Street, South Boston, L Street, or Broadway, in the Asian community, Hudson Street, whatever would be the main street, to have this electronic device that if someone is coming down Day Boulevard and they are doing it, the speed limit is 30 and then it goes to 25 and they're still doing 40 and 50. When they turn on to L Street, if there's one traffic light that could have this electronic brain, and I'm just going to use the term GPS, but it could signal the brains in most of these cars, and they used to be carburetors, but now they're electronic brains that run these cars, that car will automatically slow down to, which I agree with, 20 miles an hour is definitely. I've had people pass me on Marine Road because I'm staying to that 20 mile an hour limit, literally pass on a street that's very congested, cars on both sides, and go around I Street up by Gate of Heaven Church, literally pass. So you have those violators. The only way we're going to stop that is by, and I use the one simple thing would be in us to hopefully slow people down that would catch it, and then electronically do it.
Thank you, John.
Okay, I've got a bunch, Eddie, but I appreciate everybody that's here, and thank you for the time.
Thank you, John, and I'll stick around and I can talk to you after, and I'll pass along your issues to the appropriate department. With that, I'm going to ask if anyone has any closing statements. The only closing statement I have, well, Councilor O'Malley?
Very briefly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the chair and extension, and most importantly, thank you to the
advocates and residents who have come out, as well as the administration. Obviously, we have a lot of work to do, but it's good to see that, again, we all want the same thing, and that's building as safe streets as we possibly can. Clearly, we have a lot of work to do. Look forward to continuing your partnership in the new year and in the new term with the new council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley, and to the panelists, I want to say thank you for your work on this issue, and would you like to issue a closing statement? Well, I'd just like to, again, thank you and thank Mayor Walsh and his administration for working with the City Council and, more importantly, working with the residents on this important issue. There's probably not an issue I work more on than pedestrian safety. It impacts every neighborhood across our city. And what I'm also seeing over the last several years is really residents coming together, working closely with the city, working closely with the mayor's office or the city council. But the residents want to be active, they want to be involved, and they have some great ideas on how we can improve pedestrian safety in our city. So I want to say thank you as well to the residents that are here, and also to the residents that often stop us while we're in the supermarket or on the ball field with our kids, and that's the number one issue they're focused on is pedestrian safety. Again, I want to say thank you to central staff for helping us on this meeting, and this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.